Working the night shift as a hotel receptionist had its perks, peace and quiet mostly. But on that particular night, the silence was suffocating. The usual hum of distant traffic was absent, and the oppressive stillness hung heavy in the air. It was the kind of night that made your skin crawl. It started around 2 a.m. I was at the desk, flipping through a dog-eared magazine, trying to stave off the boredom. Suddenly, the static-laden buzz of the security monitors caught my attention. The old man in room 304 was pacing back and forth. He had checked in earlier that evening, muttering something about needing a place to rest. On the grainy screen, he looked frantic. His wild gray hair stuck out in every direction, and his eyes darted around the room as if he were being watched. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Just another insomniac, I told myself. But then I heard it, the sound. It was a low, guttural moan, like something out of a nightmare. It echoed through the empty lobby, reverberating off the marble floors and making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I strained to listen, hoping it was just the wind or some old pipes creaking. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The moaning grew louder, more desperate. I checked the monitors again. The old man had stopped pacing. He was standing perfectly still, staring directly into the camera. His eyes were wide, unblinking, filled with an unnameable horror. I felt a lump form in my throat as he slowly raised his hand and pointed at the screen, directly at me. I grabbed the phone, ready to call 911, but something stopped me. The lines were dead. No dial tone, just an eerie hissing static. Panic set in. I glanced at the monitor again, and my blood ran cold. The old man was no longer alone. A dark figure stood behind him, barely more than a shadow, its face obscured. The figure leaned in close to the old man's ear and whispered something. The old man began to tremble. I felt a chill spread through the room, as if the temperature had suddenly dropped. My breath came out in frosty puffs. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed the master key and headed to room 304, my heart pounding in my chest. The hallway stretched out before me, seemingly endless. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting unsettling shadows on the walls. With each step, the moaning grew louder, more anguished. By the time I reached the door, it was deafening. I could barely hear my own thoughts over the cacophony of despair. I took a deep breath and unlocked the door. The room was dark, the only light coming from the flickering TV screen. The old man stood in the center of the room, his back to me. His clothes were soaked in sweat, and his shoulders heaved with silent sobs. I could see the shadowy figure standing in the corner, its presence like a void, sucking all the warmth and light from the room. He turned to face me, and I saw the glint of a knife in his hand. His eyes were wild with terror, his face pale and gaunt. Before I could react, he raised the knife and plunged it into his own chest. Blood sprayed across the room, splattering the walls and the TV screen. I screamed, stumbling backward. The shadowy figure moved, gliding towards me with an unnatural, bone-chilling grace. I bolted from the room, slamming the door behind me. The lights in the lobby flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. I backed into a corner, my heart pounding. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. I closed my eyes, praying it would all go away. But when I opened them, the figure was there, standing right in front of me. And then, everything went black. When I woke up, it was morning. The lobby was bathed in sunlight, the security monitors showing nothing unusual. The old man's room was empty, as if he had never been there. But the bloodstains on the walls and floor told a different story. Working the night shift at the gas station was usually quiet. Most nights, I'd sit behind the counter, watch the clock, and wait for dawn. But that night was different. It was darker than usual, and the air felt heavy with something I couldn't quite name. It started around midnight. The bell above the door jangled, and in stumbled a man. He reeked of alcohol, His clothes were dirty, and his eyes were bloodshot. He grabbed a six-pack of beer and slapped some crumpled bills on the counter. I rang him up, hoping he'd leave quickly. Instead, he staggered to the corner, cracked open a beer, and started drinking right there. As the hours dragged on, the man became more restless. He wandered in and out of the store, muttering to himself, his words slurred and incoherent. He finally plopped down just outside the door, leaning against the wall, and started making weird noises. Low, guttural sounds that sent chills down my spine. I tried to focus on my work, but it was impossible. The man's presence was unnerving. He would occasionally glance inside, his eyes filled with a strange, unsettling intensity. His mutterings grew louder, turning into shouts and threats. He kept saying things about the darkness, about creatures lurking just out of sight. I tried to ignore him, but fear was creeping in. The clock ticked slowly towards 2 a.m. I kept glancing at the man, hoping he'd leave or fall asleep. Instead, he started banging on the window. The noise was deafening in the still night. I could see his face pressed against the glass, his eyes wild and frantic. His threats became more violent, promising terrible things if I didn't let him back in. I locked the door, my hands shaking. I knew I should call the police, but my phone was dead. The landline was on the fritz too. I was alone, trapped with this madman outside. The gas station lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Every noise seemed amplified, every creak and groan of the old building making my heart race. Suddenly, the lights went out. Total darkness enveloped the store. I fumbled for a flashlight, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The man's noises outside grew louder, more frantic. I could hear him shuffling around, banging on the walls, shouting threats and curses. I managed to find the flashlight and switched it on. The weak beam cut through the darkness, but it did little to calm my nerves. I could see the man's silhouette outside, his movements jerky and unnatural. He looked like a puppet, controlled by unseen strings. The noises grew worse. It sounded like scratching, like something trying to claw its way inside. I shined the flashlight towards the door, and my blood ran cold. The man was on all fours, scratching at the glass with his dirty nails, his face twisted into a grotesque grin. His eyes were black voids, reflecting no light. I backed away, tripping over a stack of boxes. The flashlight slipped from my grasp, rolling across the floor and casting wild shadows. I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. But there was nowhere to go. The darkness pressed in from all sides, suffocating me. Then, the noises stopped. Silence. It was more terrifying than the noise. I held my breath, straining to hear anything. The flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into complete darkness. I was alone, with no sound except my own ragged breathing. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in fear. Minutes felt like hours. I was too scared to move, too scared to breathe. Then, a soft, shuffling sound came from behind me. I turned, but I couldn't see anything in the pitch black. The sound grew closer, a wet, slithering noise that sent waves of terror through me. Something brushed against my leg. I jumped, stifling a scream. My hand found the flashlight, and I turned it on. The beam of light revealed nothing. The store was empty, but I could still hear the noise, getting louder, coming from all around me. I backed into a corner, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. The noise was deafening now, like a swarm of insects, 1,000 whispers all at once. I felt something cold and slimy wrap around my ankle, pulling me towards the darkness. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The lights flickered back on. The store returned to its usual stillness. The man was gone. There was no sign of him, no evidence of the terror I had just experienced. But I knew it was real. I could still feel the cold, slimy touch on my ankle, the echo of those terrible noises in my mind.